The 7 deadly sins: greed, lust, envy, pride, gluttony, wrath, and sloth. All of these play major roles in One Piece, but there are 7 characters in particular that perfectly embody each of these 7 deadly sins, and no, we are not counting Vegapunk's 7 alter egos here. Starting with wrath. Now basically, wrath is all about anger, violence, and letting rage truly consume you. And if you've seen any One Piece whatsoever at all, you probably know that there's quite the share of people who do just that. But in my humble opinion, there's 3 characters in particular that really take the cake here. And let's start with a great example, the beast that is Rob Lucci, the ruthless leader of Cypher Pole Zero. Now, Lucci is practically violence itself in the world of One Piece. He enforces his will through dark justice, which, let's be real, basically just means that he justifies his anger and brutality by pretending to do it for justice, which, I mean, he doesn't actually care about. And so he dishes out violence and murder to anyone that the world government views deserving. Wrath basically drives him to become one of the handful of awakened zones that we've seen so far in the story. As far as we know, awakenings happen when a user's personality perfectly aligns with the will of their devil fruits. And now, if that's true, Rob Lucci's wrath and his leopard devil fruit's carnivorous nature, well, they make even more sense. But even though Lucci is without any doubt a great example of the sin of wrath, I would argue that there are 2 other characters who embody this sin even better. And the next one of them is actually Captain Eustace Kid, one of the worst generation captains and direct rival to Luffy. Now, as you know, Kid is a walking menace to the Grand Line. He's loud, he's aggressive, and most importantly, he is ready to fight anyone to prove his ideals. At any time, he's ready to crush anyone in his path with the powers of his Jiki Jiki no Mi, his magnet fruit, using crazy moves like Punk Rotten and Punk Gibson, creating literal war machines to inflict his wrath upon his enemies. In a nutshell, he's crazy and very, very angry, impulsively taking on Yonko level members like Big Mom, Kaido, and Shanks without thinking about it twice. All the while banking on power alone and his anger to crush his enemies, for better or for worse. Sorry, not sorry, useless Captain Kid. And yet, even though Kid and Lucci do seem to fit this sin so perfectly, for me, there is one person even better than those 2 when it comes to rage and wrath. You know who I'm talking about. He's quite literally got burning hot hatred, and his name is Fleet Admiral Akainu. Now, this former admiral delivers the absolute justice of the Marines in its purest form, which is destruction. And so basically, if you don't fall in line with Sakazuki's will, you better be ready to face the heat, because nobody, and I mean nobody, is safe from the raging destruction of his magma fruit's powers. Genuinely, it doesn't matter if you're a marine, a pirate, or anything in between, get ready to face Akainu's wrath. One, think about poor Ace and Kobe, for example. Right after Ace was turned into a donut, Kobe was on the chopping block as well, just for stepping up to the big red dog. And really, maybe the only people who are worse than pirates in Akainu's eyes are the revolutionaries. For example, poor Bartholomew Kuma here was getting blasted by his magma on sight. And so it's pretty safe to say that Luffy really got his hands full with this literal hothead. But speaking of Luffy, let's of course make now our way to our second sin, which is gluttony. And here's the short of it. Gluttony is all about eating or drinking or consuming anything beyond reason. And Luffy's of course the perfect example of a glutton. Quite a big chunk of his entire worldview basically revolves around food, declaring wars and starting battles if it gets in the way of him chewing down on some really good meat. And I mean, on top of this, this future pirate king has countless times rubber banded back into a battle after being fed a personal feast. For example, he did this in his fight during Kaido or his battle against Kizaru on Egghead, and it's pretty safe to say that gluttony may be Luffy's strongest trait, but that doesn't mean that he's actually its best figurehead. out. Because there's actually a few other characters that definitely could work as well, like the lovely Jewelry Bonnie and literal goofball Lucky Roo here. Because both of them also are characters who do feast upon hordes and hordes of food. So are they gluttonous? I mean, sure, it's literally in Bonnie's title, but to embody it as a sin, well, you really have to let it consume you and those around you as well. And I now hear what you're saying. Manu, it must be someone like the fearsome sweet Commander Katakuri, right? I mean, surely a man with literal mochi powers who munches down on donuts and ripped his mouth, well, that must be the perfect example of gluttony in One Piece. I mean, who else would be it, right? Well, eagle-eyed viewer as you are, you may have noticed that I've probably left out the one obvious contender here, and it's because she is very clearly above all of them. You know her, you hate her, it's my pick for the biggest glutton in One Piece, Big Mom. Now, I just don't know how you could deny that fact. From her very clear food motive, her dangerous appetite, and huge stature, she is a glutton through and through, physically and character-wise as well. In a rage, she literally devours anything in front of her, food, villagers, or even her own family. In other words, she is a real menace, especially because of her hunger, and it's really hard to say that anyone else can stomach more in One Piece than her. I mean, please, come on. The plan to take her out during the Whole Cake Island arc very literally revolved around using a giant cake in order to take her out. And so for those reasons and many more, like eating her friends alive, I think it's a real no-brainer that Charlotte Linlin is our One Piece sin of gluttony. But, you know, all that talk about food has kind of got me a little bit tired, which is kind of perfect because sloth is next up on our sin list. Now, undoubtedly, the biggest aspect of sloth is slowness and laziness. And I do think that there is one practitioner of lazy justice who just may be the perfect first contender here. That's right, Kuzan, former Marine Admiral and current Titanic captain of the Blackbeard Pirates. Basically, once Kuzan had witnessed the Ohara incident, he was never the same. That Buster Call shook him to the core, and after taking out his fellow Marine Saul, he became far lazier and avoided responsibilities to dodge the pressure that they could cause. And honestly, who can really blame him? I mean, that trauma does sit really deep, and it's definitely something that would make someone want to avoid their job, to say the least. His too cool persona that goes really well along with his ice powers make him a great potential candidate, but after his backstory reveal during the Egghead Island arc and his fight with Garp on Beehive Island, it's very clear that this very chill guy is no longer stuck in his very lazy ways. In other words, there's definitely a few other candidates that are pretty lazy and sloth-like, more so than him. Who, you ask? Well, the world's greatest swordsman, Dracul Mihawk, basically counts as one of them. It might sound weird, but let's be honest. His whole thing is avoiding responsibility. I mean, he'd much rather prefer to hang out in his porcelain throne than be involved in any of the fighting happening in One Piece. I mean, you do know what they say, it tends to get very lonely at the top, and he does seem to definitely be in a bit of a depressive rut through most of the story. But don't worry, Hawkeyes, you're not the only one stuck in the mud here, because your rival, the Emperor Red Hair Shanks, isn't much better when you think about it. Because Shanks has basically been MIA for nearly the entire story with some sort of grand plan that he is cooking, and hadn't he actually declared that he would now finally be going after the One Piece himself, he would probably be our top candidate here. Or another glaring contender is the supreme leader of the Revolutionary Army, Monkey D. Dragon, because this fearsome criminal has made very little effort to do basically anything, period. So is that it? Dragon for Sloth 2024? No, don't worry, because there is one even more perfect candidate that we have to talk about, and to do so, we have to take a hard detour back towards the Marines, because I do believe it is actually the former Fleet Admiral Sengoku here who is our One Piece sin of sloth. Hear me out. You see, while the other sins are all about committing bad actions, sloth is basically the sin about avoiding making any action, which does not bode well for our golden afro-head Buddha here. Here's the deal. Sengoku pre-time skip enables a lot of bad stuff to happen by being just complacent and doing nothing. And what's worse, the little action that he does take is in defense of the world government. I mean, Sengoku actively and passively is the world government's lapdog, which you can definitely say about most Marines to be fair, but unlike many others, his position as Fleet Admiral actually gives him a lot of power and information about what's actually going up in the Holy Land. And so while many others can actually say that they didn't know any better, Sengoku clearly knows what he's doing, and since he's doing nothing, that is pretty bad. In fact, it's really crazy that he only begins to show some signs of pushback during Marineford, but that's still not any better because basically he actively allows a pirate, Shanks, to end the war for everyone else's sake. I mean, think about it. What a terrible choice to make as a Marine. I mean, letting a pirate come into your home and take control over the war here sounds like someone's really avoiding their moral responsibilities, I think. But don't worry, it only gets worse the more you think about it. Because once he becomes Inspector General for the world government, Sengoku becomes even more complacent somehow and lazy in his responsibilities. And as a result, that's why in my eyes, Sengoku is our prime example of the sin of sloth. But now that we've talked quite a bunch about the lazy people in the world, let's pivot over to the real go-getters, the hustlers if you want, the grinders, that's right. We've got to talk about the money movers of this world, the sin of greed contenders in One Piece. And I can't lie to you all, there are so many pirates who could be in the running here. I mean, it's definitely a really hard sin to narrow down in One Piece, but I've narrowed it down somehow to these 5 characters. And how about we start with a straw hat for a change, Navigator Nami. Now, she constantly charges her own crewmates and is hustling people for money on every single island. She's always in it for the money, but to be fair, her past gives her a pretty good reason to be focused on finances in the first place. So instead, what about someone like Captain Jack? I mean, we do know that after his time as a legendary rocks pirate, he started hoarding a giant treasure before he died. Well, sure, but the same could probably also be said about someone like Roger or so many other great pirates, so maybe it's actually Walpole, you know, the king of Drum Island, who we meet and see foiled in his consistent greedy escapades. However, after the reverie at least, he may be fearing more for his own life than wanting that sweet cash money, so I do have to admit that there is someone that I just had to talk about here as well, and he may not be actually canon, but he may also be the strongest contender for the title. And if you've seen any of the One Piece movies, I'm of course talking about the main villain of One Piece film gold, Gil Tesoro. Basically a casino royale who wields the powers of gold itself. Though I can already hear angry typing noises, so maybe we just have to knock you out of the running for now for not really existing in One Piece in the canon at least. So Zoro Tesoro. Because in the end, in the actual story, it's really hard to give the top spot of the sin of greed to anyone besides Sir Crocodile, former warlord and cross-skilled mogul. I mean, look at him. This man oozes money. Look at those fresh suits and the shiny golden claw, plus those masterful business skills. I mean, Croc is just the obvious answer here. Basically, his MO is all about the money. He takes over entire islands, gets that cold hard cash, and operates his various criminal organizations and even a casino. In other words, I guess it's the real Sigma male grindset that you really need to show what's up, I guess. Now, all good criminal masterminds and businessmen have greed at their core. So when you add being a pirate to Crocodile's titles, well, it's clear why nobody else could actually outdo him. And honestly, sounds like he should probably have considered being Sir Loan Shark instead of Sir Crocodile, if you catch my drift, but we can work on the branding later, I guess. For now though, congratulations for adding the sin of greed to your resume as well, Mr. Crocodile. Okay, but that's enough talk about money here. I'm starting to feel like the Wolf of Wall Street channel, so let's move on to our next key sin, lust. The sin of pure desire, but normally in a more hot and heavy fashion, if you catch my drift. And knowing that, it's pretty clear why some of our passionate lovers like Sanji, Brooke, and Frankie would be pretty big candidates here. I mean, those fools are basically head over heels with lust for just about any lady. And the same could be said for Momonosuke here, who despite being just a little bit younger, is just as much of a pervert as most of his Straw Hat mentors. In other words, these Straw Hat boys are rowdy and let their desires be known to many, arguably too many, and there is something to be said about such a public display of lust boosting their chances at the title here. However, there's a good point to be made that lust isn't just about the physical and bodily. I mean, look at Nico Robin, for example. I mean, her innate curiosity and endless desire to learn the true history of the world is very much a true form of lust as well. Because really, what's more full of desire and lust than throwing caution to the wind and putting your life on the line for your own dream? Lusting and craving the secret of the world definitely counts. But I get it. Don't worry. I mean, that may not be as convincing, so let's move it back to the more traditional forms of lust with our champion of this sin, the Pirate Empress, Boa Hancock. And now, even though you may be surprised, this one really shouldn't have come as a shock. I mean, who else personifies desire more than a warlord pirate empress who, despite having everything, still lusts for Luffy above all else? I mean, Hancock's lovesickness is a real issue. It makes her physically sick, literally. And you can't really say that for anyone else in the story except maybe Sanji's nosebleeds. Now, you think I might be kidding, but Boa has lust so deep, it's in her literal DNA. I mean, look at S Snake. She's the Seraphim made from her lineage factor who seems to have very similar feelings for Luffy as does Boa. In other words, that is lust at a molecular level. She is truly down bad. And we haven't even mentioned her devil fruit, which is all about lust as well, which in the end makes it a really easy win for the Pirate Empress, being our sin of lust in One Piece. And if you've been counting, we have covered 5 of the 7 sins so far, so we are entering the end game here. So how about we shift from pure desire of something very achievable to the desire of something that's basically unachievable? Because that's right, the sin of envy is up next. And once again with it, there are a ton of possible contenders for envy, and realistically, any one of them could be our top choice here. I mean, pirates and envy kind of go hand in hand, you know? And so let's bring it back a little bit to the East Blue and start with the former Sun Pirate Arlong. As you might remember, Arlong's desire for the liberation of the fishmen truly led him to some very unruly actions. Because of his mindset, he happily ruined the lives of many people in the East Blue, even hurting our beloved Nami, just so he could make fishmen be seen above the rest of the races in the world, especially humans. In other words, this shark was truly envious of the other race's social status. A man with motives and goals driven by pure envy, and it's really safe to say that if he lasted longer in the series, well, he could have been our actual winner here. Which then means that it must be the Yonko Kaido that does steal the spot here, right? And that is a really fair claim. You see, Kaido yearned for the power and rivalry of his former Rocks crew and grew to become incredibly envious of Joy Boy in the process as well. Unfortunately for him, our slapstick rubber boy here already had been deemed Joy Boy, however, it just wasn't known to him yet. And so once Kaido realized that he could never be Joy Boy, he slipped into an alcoholic state, foregoing most things, craving defeat at the hand of those with the strength to actually defeat him. However, as a really powerful Oni, it became a little bit too difficult to even achieve that task, and this only helped compound that envy. Turns out that the Azure Dragon may have actually been green with envy this whole time, it seems. But enough about fishmen and dragon fishmen, I guess. Neither of them hold a candle to the real show stealer of this sin. It's almost comical actually, because the one who has the most envy in the entire story, is actually the highest status person that we have talked about so far. The one and only Killer Clown Emperor Buggy. Oh yeah, that's right. This dastardly jester is truly the most envious person on the high seas. I mean, if you name anyone he's got a relationship with, I guarantee you that he's got a burning desire to be them. Don't believe me? Well, think about Luffy. Buggy is jealous of just about anything that Luffy does. How about Shanks? I mean, sure, Buggy is a little bit heartbroken because of his old friend's broken promise, but he's spiteful and envious of what Shanks has achieved as well. And yeah, I hear you loud and clear. Surely Buggy isn't envious of the other Cross Guild leaders. I mean, they're all equals, right? I mean, he is technically the face and leader. Well, on the outside he is at least, but take a peek behind the curtain and it's clear that Buggy sure is jealous of the power and commanding presence of Mihawk and Crocodile. And really, for being a Yonko, Buggy sure spends a lot of time in the shadows of those who he wants to be like. And so here's hoping too that when he finally goes to claim the One Piece on his own, he doesn't get struck with another wave of sickness like last time, and I'm really rooting for you and your envious nature, Buggy. Which means that, yes, here it is everybody, the moment that you've been waiting for, without question, the greatest and most interesting of all the 7 sins, the one every other anime also put on the pedestal for a very good reason, the final sin, pride. Now whether you're the son of a demon king, the prince of the scions, or the king of the volleyball court, pride is the sin that manifests in some of the strongest and most terrifying characters there are. And in One Piece, this also is absolutely the case. So let's go analyzing the 5 figureheads of pride in One Piece and who actually takes the crown of crowns. Starting with a quite obvious frontrunner, the pirate hunter and soon-to-be world's strongest swordsman, Roronoa Zoro. That's pretty undeniable that if you consume any Eastern media, that a warrior's pride is his greatest weapon. Pride reinforces all of their beliefs, becoming the motive behind each swing of their blades. Now, give a warrior like that not 1, not 2, but 3 swords, and you've got yourself one pretty big bundle of pride there. And as you're well aware, the moss-headed vice captain of the Straw Hat wears that mantle of pride quite well. Zoro is more than happy to put himself into harm's way to defend his own ideals and those of his crew and captain, and as a result, he's always ready to take on any challenge. It doesn't matter if his enemy is above or below him, it is his duty as a crewmate and swordsman to wield his pride against them. Now, of course, he's not the only warrior to embody this pride either, because our next 2 characters are absolutely giant contenders for the crown as well. Of course, I'm talking about Dory and Broggy, because the captains of the giant warrior pirates have taken their warrior's pride to a whole other titanic level. In case you forgot, these 2 giant warriors have been fighting over a quite silly disagreement for more than 100 years. That's quite a lot of time to bank on warrior's pride if you ask me. I mean, they may embody it better than anyone else in One Piece, but if you really think about it, there is far more to pride than just a soldier's honor. Because really, at its core, pride can be a lot darker and more twisted than just that, full of evil and superiority. Such is the case for Vinsmoke Judge, leader of the Germa Kingdom and Sanji's father. Now, Judge has a pride and arrogance that lead him on a path of scientific manipulation and villainy. This tyrannical ruler laid claim to the North Blue and the Grand Line with the immense technological powers of the Germa, a power that he has just a little too much pride in, let's be honest. But also, newsflash Judge, I mean, riding around on giant snails may not be exactly the best for your branding if you're trying to be, you know, taken somewhat seriously as this sort of prideful mastermind, just saying. But despite his silly means of transportation, Judge actually is no joke. He does command respect from those who oppose him due to the sheer strength of his army, something basically built on the darkest sense of pride there is, superiority. And yet, if we're talking about the core of pride, if we're talking about things like superiority and birthright, then it's really clear who our #1 sin of pride actually is. You know what was coming, because Don Quixote do Flamingo is without a question the clear choice. This truly wicked puppet master and king of manipulation stands to show what the sickest and most vile sense of pride truly embodies. Dofi has the arrogance and rotten evil of the celestial dragons in spades, showing that when you believe that you deserve something, you can just take it by force and brutality. Clearly, Doflamingo is truly the fallen angel of One Piece. He's obsessed with his birthright status and overtakes the entire nation of Dressrosa to prove it. Every single action he takes in the story, vile. Every word he speaks, spiteful, and every scene he is in, prideful. If we're talking about sinful characters, there is maybe no more sinful character than an angel in hell. And since Doflamingo thinks that all others are low-key trash, he does not view them with respect at all. He thinks that everyone around him is destined to be controlled and used by him, and as a result, speaks his mind with no hesitation. Because in the mind of this puppet master, he is always 100% correct. And let's be real, if that is not toxic pride at its peak, I really don't know what is, which is why I will have him as the One Piece's sin of pride #1. And speaking of Doflamingo, you might have realized that a lot of the key sins from this video do seem to be major villains in the world of One Piece. I guess when you're a villain, you're bound to be a little bit rotten as well, but have you ever wondered what they are really like at their core, what really drives them, and how powerful they actually are in parts thanks to their sin? Well, if you want to learn more about Doflamingo, Akainu, Crocodile, and every other villain in One Piece, you can watch this video right here next. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, subscribe. I know it's kind of annoying to be asked, but it really does help out the channel. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next one.